Toto Wolff did not explode because Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes stopped. He exploded because it stopped in the worst possible moment, with 4 laps left, while Antonelli was running second, while Lewis Hamilton was driving a Ferrari to victory, and while Mercedes were trying to hide a problem that is now impossible to hide. This was not just another retirement. This was the second terminal power unit failure in 3 races. And that single failure may have exposed the truth Mercedes feared most: their fastest car might also be their biggest weakness. Because when your championship leader is fighting for a podium, your former champion is winning in red, your 2 drivers are already clashing behind closed doors, and your team boss says you cannot fight for a title like this, something inside the silver arrows is no longer under control. And the most dangerous part is this: Barcelona did not create Mercedes' internal war. It revealed how far it had already gone. Subscribe to the channel. Barcelona was supposed to calm everything down. That was the plan. Mercedes arrived at the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya with the kind of weekend every top team dreams about. A fast car. A front row start. A championship leader with serious pace. And a track that should have rewarded the very thing Mercedes believed they had built better than almost anyone else: power, efficiency, and control. But Formula One has a cruel way of exposing the truth. It does not expose it when the cameras are relaxed. It does not expose it in a meeting room, where every answer can be polished. It exposes it when the car is heavy with fuel, the tires are fading, the temperature is climbing, the championship points are almost in your hands, and the driver has nowhere to hide. That is what happened to Kimi Antonelli. And to understand why Toto Wolff looked so furious, you have to understand what Mercedes thought they were protecting before the race even began. They were not just protecting a result. They were protecting an image. For years, Mercedes built its power on discipline. Clean execution. Clear leadership. Drivers who could fight, but still serve the bigger machine. Even when the pressure was unbearable, the team always tried to project the same message: everything is under control. But in Barcelona, that message started to fall apart. George Russell had put the Mercedes on pole. That should have been the headline. A perfect answer to the noise around the team. A statement that Mercedes still had the speed to dictate a Grand Prix from the front. And beside him, Lewis Hamilton lined up in the Ferrari, only a tiny margin away from pole, close enough to make the entire grid feel uncomfortable. That detail alone changed the emotional weight of the race. Because Hamilton was not just a rival in another red car. He was the ghost of Mercedes' greatest era, standing right next to them, ready to take something away. And behind that front row tension was Antonelli, the teenager carrying a burden most drivers never face in an entire career. He was not being treated like a normal rookie. He was being judged like the future of Mercedes, the replacement for a legend, and somehow, at the same time, a championship leader. That is a dangerous combination. Talent can make a driver fast. Pressure decides whether that speed becomes control or chaos. And Antonelli's weekend had already shown small cracks before the race. In the 3rd practice session, he received a reprimand for erratic driving after braking aggressively in front of an Aston Martin. He later admitted it came from frustration. That word matters. Frustration. It tells you the pressure was already inside the helmet. Not enough to break him, not enough to define him, but enough to be noticed. Enough for the officials to step in. Enough for people inside the paddock to wonder whether the championship leader was starting to feel the weight of his own rise. And this is where the story becomes bigger than one mistake. Because Antonelli was not only dealing with outside pressure. He was dealing with pressure from the driver sitting in the same Mercedes garage. George Russell was not going to become a supporting character in his own team. He had taken pole. He had experience. He had status. He had spent years preparing for the moment when Mercedes would need him to lead. And now, suddenly, the teenage sensation was not waiting behind him. Antonelli was attacking. That is the hidden tension inside Mercedes. On paper, 2 fast drivers are a gift. In reality, 2 fast drivers can become a fire if the team cannot control where the heat goes. Think of it like a crowded doorway. Everyone wants to get through first. If the people move calmly, the whole group gets out faster. But if 2 people start pushing at the same time, the doorway does not become quicker. It becomes dangerous. That was Mercedes before Barcelona. Fast, ambitious, crowded, and one bad moment away from collision. The warning had already come in Canada, when Antonelli and Russell clashed during the sprint. Russell defended hard at turn 1 and forced Antonelli onto the grass. Antonelli went straight to the radio, angry, saying it should have been a penalty, saying he had been alongside, saying the move was very naughty. For a fan watching from home, that might sound like normal racing drama. For Toto Wolff, it was something else. Because team radio does not stay inside the car. It travels. It becomes a message to the world. It tells rivals where you are sensitive. It tells the media where to dig. It tells the other side of the garage exactly how angry you really are. That is why Wolff stepped in. He told Antonelli to concentrate on the driving and not on radio moaning. Then, when Antonelli made it clear that if this was how they needed to race, it was good to know, Wolff pushed the conversation away from public view. They would talk internally, not on the radio. That was not just a team boss calming a young driver. That was Toto trying to close a door before everyone saw what was behind it. But the problem with pressure is that it always finds another way out. In Canada, it came through the radio. In Barcelona, it came through the race result. Because Mercedes needed Barcelona to prove that the internal tension was manageable. Russell on pole could have been a statement of leadership. Antonelli climbing through the race could have been a statement of depth. A strong double result could have allowed Wolff to say, yes, the drivers are fighting, but this is healthy, this is what a championship team looks like. Instead, the weekend turned into a trap. Hamilton was close enough to punish them. Ferrari were sharp enough to outthink them. Antonelli was fast enough to pass Russell. And then, just when Mercedes needed the car to survive, it failed. That is why the retirement hit so hard. It landed on top of everything that was already unstable. The driver rivalry. The radio tension. The pressure of a young championship leader. The presence of Hamilton in red. The new technical scrutiny around the power unit. The fear that Mercedes' advantage might come with a hidden cost. All of it came together in one moment. Antonelli stopped, and the entire Mercedes story changed. Before that, they could still sell Barcelona as a fight for victory that got away. After that, they had to face something darker. Their car had the speed to be in the championship fight, but maybe not the strength to survive it. And in Formula 1, that is the nightmare. Because a slow car gives you a clear problem. A fragile fast car gives you hope first, then takes it away. But the real problem was not born on the final laps in Barcelona. It started earlier, in the part of Formula 1 that fans do not always see clearly. The meetings. The radio messages. The tone of a driver's voice. The way a team principal answers a question. The way one side of the garage looks at the other when a teammate gets the better strategy, the better track position, or the better public protection. That is where Mercedes' internal war began to grow. Not with one explosion. With small signals. And those signals were already there before Antonelli's car stopped. Canada was the warning. Barcelona was the consequence. In Canada, Antonelli felt Russell had crossed a line. Russell defended at turn 1, Antonelli was pushed wide onto the grass, and the young Mercedes driver reacted immediately. He did not speak like someone calmly accepting hard racing. He spoke like someone who believed his own teammate had made a move that deserved punishment. That matters because teammates do not argue like rivals. At least, they are not supposed to. A rival can be aggressive, and you accept it because that is the enemy. But when the car pushing you wide has the same team colors, the same engineers, the same team boss, the same championship target, it feels different. It feels personal. And Antonelli's words on the radio showed exactly that. He said it should have been a penalty. He said he had been alongside. He called the move very naughty. Those were not random complaints. They were clues. He was not just angry about losing space on the track. He was asking a bigger question. Are we really allowed to race each other like this? That question is dangerous inside a top team. Because once one driver asks it, the other driver has to answer with his actions. And Russell's answer, at least publicly, was cold. He did not treat the moment like a major scandal. He saw it as hard racing. Not a big deal. To Russell, that attitude makes sense. He has fought too long to become the driver Mercedes depends on. He was not going to soften his elbows because a rookie had arrived with a huge reputation. He was not going to move aside because Antonelli was younger, hyped, and leading the championship. In Russell's mind, respect is not gifted. It is earned corner by corner. But to Antonelli, that same attitude could feel like a message. You may be leading the championship, but I am not here to protect you. And that is where the conflict becomes more complicated. Because both drivers can believe they are right. Russell can believe he is defending his place fairly. Antonelli can believe his teammate is making the championship harder than it needs to be. Wolff can believe the team needs freedom on track, but discipline in public. And all three can be right enough to make the situation almost impossible to settle cleanly. That is the kind of problem that breaks teams quietly. Not because anyone is obviously wrong. Because everyone has a reasonable argument, and none of those arguments fit together easily. Then Wolff stepped onto the radio. His message to Antonelli was sharp. Focus on the driving. Do not complain on the radio. Talk about it internally. For the audience, it sounded like control. For Mercedes, it sounded like damage prevention. Because Wolff knew that if the conflict became public too early, every future race would be watched through that lens. Every defense from Russell would be called suspicious. Every attack from Antonelli would be called emotional. Every strategy call would be questioned. Every podium interview would become a test. And that is exactly what happened. By the time the paddock reached Barcelona, the rivalry was already part of the story. Antonelli even admitted before the weekend that both he and Russell were determined not to upset Wolff during their intense internal title fight. That sentence sounds responsible on the surface. It sounds mature. It sounds like two drivers who understand the boss wants order. But underneath it, there is another meaning. They knew Wolff was already worried. Drivers do not say they are trying not to upset the team principal unless there is something to upset him about. That is the quiet reveal. Mercedes were not walking into Barcelona with a clean garage. They were walking in with a garage trying very hard to look clean. And then came the technical controversy. The new power unit rules had already placed Mercedes under a brighter light. Rival teams had complained about a perceived engine advantage, and the governing body had introduced a new hot compression ratio test from June 1st. Barcelona was the first power circuit where that new measurement standard truly mattered. Now, for a normal fan, that sounds like complicated engineering language. But the simple version is this. Rivals believed Mercedes may have found something clever in the power unit. The rules tightened. Barcelona became the first real test of that environment. And Mercedes needed to show that their speed was legal, sustainable, and reliable. That last word is the one that hurts. Reliable. Because speed without reliability is a promise with a trapdoor underneath it. Mercedes had every reason to believe Barcelona could restore their authority. A strong result would quiet the noise around the drivers. A clean power unit weekend would quiet the questions around the car. A win from pole would remind the paddock that Mercedes still knew how to execute when the pressure was highest. Instead, every layer became sharper. Russell started from pole, but could not turn it into victory. Hamilton was close enough to attack, and Ferrari made the decisive strategic move. Antonelli showed the pace to climb into second, proving again that he was not just a future project, but a current threat. Then the car failed. That failure connected two stories Mercedes desperately needed to keep separate: the driver conflict and the technical doubt. Before Barcelona, Wolff could treat them as different issues. One was about managing two competitive drivers. The other was about ensuring the car package could survive under the new rules. But once Antonelli retired from a podium place, the separation disappeared. Because the failure did not happen to a driver outside the title picture. It happened to the championship leader. It happened to the young driver already sitting at the center of the internal rivalry. It happened after he had moved ahead of Russell. And it happened while Hamilton, the former Mercedes icon, was winning for Ferrari. That is not just bad timing. That is the worst possible combination. Imagine being Wolff in that moment. On one side, you have the driver you chose as Mercedes' future, losing major points through no fault of his own. On the other, you have Russell, the established Mercedes driver, watching the team's young star suffer another blow while his own position in the team remains politically sensitive. And out front, Hamilton is turning Ferrari into the emotional story of the day. There is no comfortable answer. If Wolff shows too much anger about Antonelli's failure, it highlights how much Mercedes may be leaning on the teenager's title campaign.